The mother is not fit. These are the words that I heard in the hospital on the first night with my newborn son. Now, I'm a mom of 3 boys. They're sweet and they're sassy and they're beautiful. And I know that raising 3 boys is going to take a lot, so I appreciate your praise and your condolence. I've learned how to tackle motherhood as it relates to postpartum depression. And I'm here now to advocate for how we as a village can change the conversation surrounding that. A little understanding goes a long way in forging a community forward. For women in the audience, you may be more familiar with this condition, but I bet many men are not, and that's okay. That's why we're all here. So I have one question for you. Who has a mother? If you could raise your hand. So we're all in this together. 1 in 9 mothers experience postpartum depression. That means if there were approximately 100 people in the room, 11 of us would have either experienced postpartum depression or know someone who has. And now you all do. Postpartum depression does not discriminate. It doesn't discriminate against birth order, between your first or your 5th. It doesn't discriminate against ethnicity, economic status, or even gender. Even fathers are susceptible. Postpartum depression, at this point, if you're not familiar with it, you might be wondering what it does. It interferes with a new mother's ability to care for her baby and handle other daily tasks. Symptoms usually develop within the first few weeks, but they can develop during pregnancy, they can develop after a few months, or even up to a year. A study on infant behavioral health in 2010 summarized it best. Caregiving is compromised by postpartum depression. It went on to highlight universal screening for both the mother and the father during the postpartum period, and suggested early interventions such as therapy, coaching for mothers, and infant massage, because the importance of touch for an infant and building that bond is paramount to their health. Long-term negative outcomes for a child with a mother with postpartum depression include behavioral, emotional, and health problems later in their life. So now we're not talking about one individual case of postpartum depression. It affects the family, and it affects the child, and it will later affect the society. So mothers surround us. And if your mother is anything like mine, she's probably a little too close. I love you, Mom. But not just our own. Mothers are our coworkers, they're our friends, they're our family, they're the woman in the elevator, they're the woman pumping gas. And we all have our stories of struggles and triumph. So today I'm going to share mine, and I'm going to leave you with an acronym at the end that I hope you can bring out into the community and help raise our mothers. I never imagined I would be a mom. This is not my child, this is my niece. Obviously, I'm the cool aunt here. I moved from Fort Wayne to New York at 22. I had my own path to carve out in the concrete jungle. I worked 80 hours a week, and I commuted over an hour a day. I worked hard, and I played hard, and 20-something New Yorker Jennifer would not have changed anything for it. But as they say, when we make plans, God laughs. I became a mother in a New York heat wave in July of 2010, and I had prepared 9 months for a glorious natural birth with butterflies and rainbows and everything that happens usually with a natural birth. So at 40 weeks, I went to the ER with severe chest pain. And after 18 hours and 2 failed inductions, I had an emergency C-section, and I was devastated. I had to mourn the loss of a natural birth because I had put the natural birth on such a pedestal. But the best part about that day was this little guy. He was born happy and healthy, 5 pounds, 10 ounces. During our first night in the hospital, my son was crying. And in my new mom medicated stupor, I started to undress him. We were in a heat wave. I was hot. I thought he was hot. It made sense. But the nurse came over and she reprimanded me. without providing support, such as skin-to-skin contact or working on latching, she called to the nursery, and I heard her say the 5 words that I'll never forget. The mother is not fit to have the baby in the room. And it really didn't matter what she said after that, because the damage was already done. Weeks after leaving the hospital, these words ran over and over in my mind. I felt an intense guilt that I couldn't bond with the baby. I had a guilt about the C-section, which wasn't true. I had guilt over not being able to breastfeed, which is normal. And I was so deeply saddened that I couldn't give my son what he deserved. And he deserved more. So I made it a point to return to work at full force, trying to avoid the feelings that I felt as a new mother. And there was a silver lining with that. This is Abuelita. This is his grandmother. And during the day she would watch him, and they became inseparable. While other moms might feel jealous or insecure about the bond that they had, I had a sense of relief. I was relieved because I knew that my son, during the day, was being loved by somebody, and being loved by him in a way that I hadn't figured out yet. Over time, though, my weaknesses began to show through. I worked in the Empire State Building, which was my claim to fame, to family and friends. It was the epitome of the New York experience when they came to visit, and I was so proud of it. But one day my anxiety peaked into a panic attack, and I was carried out of the Empire State Building on a stretcher. Not exactly one of my proudest moments. I went to the ER and I was treated for dehydration. At any point, I could have told someone how overwhelmed I felt or the deep feelings of sadness that I had, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know how to express it, and no one asked. A few months later, it happened again, this time in front of my son and his father. I was in the bathroom crying, and my son saw me crying, and an ambulance was called. This time, the first responder was talking to me as we were walking to the ambulance. And I was telling her tearfully how I felt overwhelmed and I didn't know how I could handle it. And she told me one thing that I'll never forget. She said, as mothers, we can't do everything. You need to take care of yourself. In true New York fashion, she said, you need to take care of yourself. There was no more being a victim or creating excuses or creating barriers. I had to take care of myself so that I could take care of my son. Later, I went to the ER and I was released again, treated and released for dehydration. But that was the last time. At a certain point, I let go of my fear and pride. I reached out to my doctor and I started taking medicine and building that bond with my son. After my second son was born, and retelling these experiences is when the actual diagnosis came. It was very much delayed. But I thought, how can we help our mothers? How can we as a community raise our mothers? There's a saying going around lately, and it's, we rise by lifting others. So how can we rise and raise our mothers? I created an acronym for that. You're welcome. We can raise them with reverence, with awareness, with inclusion, support, and with education. Reverence. This is a funny story. I work a lot internationally and just had my 3rd child. So well into my 3rd pregnancy, we had a colleague from China visit. And he playfully, the whole time he was here, referred to me as Panda Bear. And I thought it was my dark circles under my eyes, my big belly. And he actually meant, and so I would laugh every time, and he didn't really understand why I kept laughing. And he used it as a term of endearment. He was explaining to me that in China, pandas are protected, they're revered animals. And I feel like we can take that same logic and apply it to our own mothers. In our big world, in our digital world, we lose a sense of empathy with each other. And that's what makes us human. So think about how one act of kindness, one compliment to another mother, can actually impact her well-being and the welfare of her child. And also to new moms, to accept help and to accept a compliment, because you are worth it. Awareness. Postpartum depression is universal. And in healthcare, it seems like they're just catching up to that. The FDA approved the first postpartum depression drug. It's upwards of $35,000 and 60 hours of treatment. So it's not accessible to everybody, but luckily we all are. In my 2 months postpartum, I have had 4 screenings for postpartum depression. I had 1 screening at the hospital. I had 1 screening at my son's wellness checkup. I had the OBGYN who called 2 weeks postpartum just to check how I was doing. And then again, 6 weeks postpartum during my 6-week checkup. And that just wasn't because I had experienced postpartum depression. That was the standard of care that I was receiving. And that's the difference in the industry that we're seeing now. But it's not just the industry, it's the community. Inclusion. It takes a village, and everyone here is a part of that village. Today the world is smaller than it's ever been, but our worlds grow larger each day. Mothers need a supportive community in which to grow and raise their children. We need our family and friends to be present. How does a new mother say that they're not bonding with their baby? How does a new mother say that she has an anger or a sadness or anxiety that she's never felt before? How does a new mother say that she's afraid of being left alone with her baby because she's afraid of what she might do to herself or to the baby? How does a new mother say these things and know that we're going to understand? It's through support. Now, it was the kindness of a stranger who let me tearfully explain how overwhelmed I was. And she told me I needed to take care of myself. And at that time, I had a supportive partner who was an adoring and engaging father. But my family and my friends were thousands of miles away. So many times I wanted to reach out, but I didn't even know where to start. I remember being in the hospital room right before we were about to leave with my son and feeling a heavy darkness. And I never told anyone. And I bet that most of my family and friends have never heard this story before today. So I made a conscious decision not to say anything until now, because what a disservice we're doing to new mothers. We need to support each other and share our stories of motherhood, because we're all in this together. But it's important to say that nobody was telling me that I was a failure, and it was actually quite the opposite. But postpartum depression does not listen to what other people have to say. So we have to speak louder. We have to share our stories. We have to support new mothers in ways big and small. So if you can take away one point in this whole talk, it should be, ask a new mom how she's doing. We all love babies. I totally get it. Ask about the baby, but first, ask how she is doing. She might not spill her whole emotional baggage on you, and that's okay. But what she will do is she'll know that you cared, and that's way more important. It's important to know that someone cares, and someone cares about your well-being. And then ask about the baby. And finally, education. We can read all the books, we can take all the classes on parenting, on birthing, on postpartum depression, but education is all through experience. It was my son's grandmother who taught me how to bond with him, who taught me how to love him, just by watching her. After my second son was born, I knew the darkness of postpartum depression, And as soon as I started to feel it, as soon as I started to feel panic, I called my friends and I said, just talk to me. Sometimes we need to get out of our own heads. So we're going to put this into practice. I'm 2 months postpartum, and I'm into my third pregnancy, so I want everyone to ask me how I'm doing on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Thanks, guys. I'm doing so good. I appreciate you asking me. I'm not perfect, and that's okay. The point is to be healthy. And oh yeah, the mother is fit, thanks to the village that raised her. Thank you.